So in September, I read the Lord of the Rings $1 billion TV series is being released. Season
Live
1.
action.
Is it? Well, yeah, it's real
It's not a
people.
cartoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, do you know what platform it's on?
I do not.
I know they said recently that they like may or may not have nudity in it because they're trying to like compete with HBO's Game of Thrones.
That's awesome.
So I know.
Makes it even better.
I hope it's Frodo. You know.
Wait, what?
What?
You hope the nudity's Frodo?
What?
All right, everybody. Well, welcome to Guardian Test Prep's Back to Basic podcast. We are excited today to give you some testing tricks and tips. So yeah, as many of you know, obviously we do the test prep side of things as well. And what we find is that even if you study your hardest, even if you know the content really well, we still have students
fail every time.
No, that's
test prep hasn't helped anyone.
No, we've had a lot of luck with our test prep program, but a lot of it comes down to, do you understand the test itself?
Yeah.
So what we find with a lot of students who do struggle, even though they do know the content, even though they have studied hard, is that they don't know how to take this type of test or this test specifically. So today we want to take some time to go over some test taking tips and tricks. And
I hope that's what we're naming this. Otherwise, we're just going to have said it
a bunch of time.
No, yeah. The most common, I think, complaint that I get about the NREMT is that people I'm not a test taker. I'm not a test taker. I have test anxiety. Like, hey, welcome to my life. Like, that's why we made this program. Like, we made this program essentially based off of my
Jason's
first
experience failing the exam
one time. No, but when I originally took the exam, this is a program that I really would have wanted to have in place for me. And it allowed me to, kind of create something that I think would have been beneficial to me back then. But I had to very much learn how to take these types of exams. And a lot of that stuff you passed on from a lot of your, med school and MCAT
And that's what I was going to say. So
exam.
It's not just this exam. So I actually took one. So in medical school, there's like multiple exams you have to take. And it's like step 1, step 2, and step 3. Step 3 is the last one. It's really considered the easiest in the sense that, what's that?
The third one.
It's the third one, the last one. But it's the last one before you like graduate medical school. And it's technically the easiest because it has much more to do with like patient care. You've already made it through the other one. So by the time you get to that point, but I took it and failed it. And I didn't fail the harder ones, and I'd studied really well for this one, and I could not figure out what had happened. So I literally called. I was just kind of amazed. I'm usually pretty honest with myself. Like if I didn't study hard enough,
I remember this.
But so I called the test, the tests, not the test center, but the actual like board that does the test, and I said, "Can you tell me what happened?" And they're like, "Well, let me look." And like apparently, like I had thought I was in the demo questions and just like clicked to the end and didn't do the first 50 questions of the exam.
Yeah.
Because I just did, again, I wasn't familiar with the testing platform.
In my mind, I feel like you like had forgotten it. How I remember this is like you had forgotten to do like the other sheet, like the back sheet of the piece of paper.
Yeah,
I know it didn't work that way.
It's the computer version of that.
Yeah,
the computer version
look on the back.
Right. Well, I thought I thought the first question in the section was a demo question. It was like, "Do you want to skip to the next section?" And I was like, "Yep." Just skip through the whole first section of the test.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
why would they even allow that as an option? That's what I don't understand about this.
Well, true. But again,
we'll talk
just
about demo questions in here too. But yeah, test taking is something that I don't think school necessarily prepares you for, in the sense that like you're used to taking tests a certain way, but these like big licensure exams you're not used to.
I'm like, that being said, I did take it a second time and still failed because I even know. I'm just kidding. No, I passed.
I was gonna be like, and that sums up Chris's story about almost becoming a doctor. It's like, wait, he's not. So, all right, yeah. So we'll jump right into it. So one of the biggest hangups with people is adaptive testing. Mm-hmm. So in order to understand the NREMT and other exams like it, the NCLEX is like this too. You have to understand the difference between linear exams and adaptive exams. So what we're used to is what's called a linear exam. What you're used to in normal school is that if you have 100 questions, you get 75 of them right, you get a 75%, right? It's as simple as that. And you are judged based on how high of a percentage you get. Right. So if you can get the majority, a certain majority of questions right, you win the day and you get an A, B, C, whatever, passing score, right? Adaptive exams don't work that way at all. So a couple of things with linear exams, questions are equal for everyone. So if I'm taking the exact same exam you are, and it is based on the amount of correct answers. Mm-hmm. With an adaptive exam, the questions are going to adapt to you individually. So what's going to happen is we're not going to take the same exam. In fact, you would never even take the same exam twice. So depending on how you're answering questions, we don't all even get the same first question. how you're answering questions is going to determine the next question that you're going to give you, both in topic sometimes and in difficulty. And it's not about the amount of correct answers you get, which I think is the biggest hang up for people.
Yeah.
It's about the level of correct answers you're getting. So in order to explain this, I wish I could like pull up a chart, but in order to explain this, let's say you and I are making an adaptive test and we decide that we write levels of questions, and an easy question is just kind of like a true or false, and a hard question is a whole scenario-based question, right? And we level these questions from 1 to 10. All right, so a 10 would be a really hard question, and 1 would be a really easy question. Everyone should be able to get a 1. It should be very difficult for anyone to get a 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
We make an exam, and then what we decide is that we want people to, on average, in order to pass this exam and be ready to go have their license and be out in the field, we want them to average a level 5 question, right? So what that means is if you take question number 1 and we start you out with a level 2 question and you get it right, that's great. Then you get a level 3 question, you get it right. And then it adapts to you, it gives you a level 4 question, you get it right. And this is an elementary example. It'll give you several versions of these questions, might bounce around a little bit. And then you get a level 5 question and you get it wrong. Are you passing or failing the test? You've just got a lot of right answers. Are you passing or failing the test? Technically, you're failing the test. You have not proven that you can get above a level 5 question.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but also you could get in a level 2 question, you get it right, and then it gives you a level 8 question and you get it wrong, and it gives you a level 7 question, you get it wrong, it gives you a level 6 question, you get it wrong, it gives you a level 5 question, you get it right, you just pass.
You're passing the test.
Right.
But what has my brain told me, right? Because I'm used to linear exams, my brain has told me I'm getting over 50% of the questions wrong, I must be failing, right? And that happens constantly. What a lot of times happens is you get to that level 5, and again, I don't know if it's like level 5 for the NREMT. This is just an example, but you get to that level 5, and you get it right, then they give you a level 6, you get it wrong. You get a level 5 right, you get a level 6, it gives you wrong. You get a level 5 right, gives you a level 7, you get it wrong. You get a level 5 right. So now in your mind, 50% of the questions you're getting wrong. If you were taking a linear exam and you were getting 50% of the material you weren't sure you knew,
right,
you would feel like you were failing the test. And that is a failing grade, right? 50% would be an F.
Yeah.
So it tricks our mind into thinking, and that I think is the problem with it. It makes sense from an educator standpoint of, wow, this is a great way. We can have a custom test. You know, that's a difficult test to cheat on, right? We can't share answers or anything like that. It really gives like expansive, in terms of the data that you can pull from it, you can get really expansive data into how people are answering. And it really, it determines whether you have a deep understanding of the material. However, for the test taker,
right,
it's horrible. It feels like you're failing.
It's a psychological issue because the thing is too, is I think there's been a lot of complaints in general across all education that tests don't really measure people's, what am I trying to say?
Skill level?
They don't really measure people's skill level. So an adaptive test probably does a way better job of that. Like it's solving the problem of, hey, this is actually a more fair test. Mm-hmm. But because psychologically we've grown up always taking linear exams.
Yeah.
Like had we always taken adaptive exams and understood that as children, like I feel like this exam wouldn't be that, like it would be common sense.
Yeah.
But it's ingrained in us that like the number of questions right is how well I'm doing.
It's just like a societal thing almost. You know,
and sometimes that knowledge right there about the NREMT is enough for people to be like, oh, okay. Yeah. So if I'm getting a bunch of questions wrong, it actually might be a good sign. And just that little mental click is sometimes enough to get rid of that anxiety of like, okay, don't worry about it.
Right. And this is the reason that we say this a lot. You know, we'll go on Facebook and forums and stuff like that. And people are like, I got 75 questions. Did I pass a test? And it's like, I don't know why I gave myself a country accent in that. I guess I just feel rude. Like Facebook people are just like hicks or something. I don't know why I did that. But anyway, did I pass the test? It doesn't matter. The amount of questions does not matter. You can pass with 75 questions. You can pass with the max amount of questions. They might give you, as a doc, they might give you like 45 below level 5 questions before they even get you to a level 5 questions, and you're getting all of those right, but it doesn't matter for their data.
Right.
So they're doing statistical analysis on like each question. So just the amount just doesn't matter. But what happens is they find out that I think it's somewhere around right now, it's somewhere around 75 for a paramedic test, and the NREMT is like the cutoff. So if you can, that's the minimum amount of questions that you'll be asked. The minute someone gets to 76, they think I must be failing, because the test is trying to give me a chance to pass now, and I haven't guaranteed that I pass at 75. I haven't convinced the test by 75 that I'm passing. And that just throws people off. And it happened to me. I got to 75 and immediately shut down the first time I took this test because I was like, well, I didn't ace it. because that's what it feels like. If I aced it, it would know by now, right? But you don't know that.
That's not
you
true.
Just don't know that.
Right.
There's also test sampling questions in there that like don't weigh in on the score whatsoever. They like want to see if those questions are any good for future tests.
And they want to test, like, so think about it in our example of like level 1 through 10. If I have like a level 7 question that I'm not sure if it should be a level 7 question or a level 5 question, how am I going to test that? I'm going to give it to a bunch of people and see how they score on it.
And that's
right?
a sampling that we can research.
Exactly. So 75, 85, 90 questions. I mean, like it has nothing. It's all about the statistical data of like, maybe I'm measuring these questions. Maybe you aced all these sections and I need to ask you a couple extra questions in one section to be able to statistically show that
And we're not making this up. So like you can go on the NREMT site. I don't know if you can find it.
We're not making this up.
No, I don't know if you can find it anymore because the video that kind of explains it from their perspective and how that works, it goes more into the statistical analysis. But this guy at one point in this interview, it's got to be from the 90s. It looks like an older video.
Yeah.
But this guy goes, it doesn't matter if you aced the test or if you bombed the test. It doesn't matter if you're like a level 10 genius or you're a level 1 and you're really struggling. Everyone walks out of the NREMT having failed about 50% of the questions.
Yeah.
Because the thing is if you sit down with your prior knowledge base, it's going to give you all level 10 questions the whole time, and you're going to be struggling in the 9 to 10 range. You'll get 9 right, you get 10 wrong. You get 9 right, you get 10 wrong. You fail 50% of the questions.
Right.
Me, I go in as a brand new, guy, and I take it. I might be struggling with 5-6, 5-6, 5-6, or 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. It doesn't matter if you're really good at the test or you're really bad at the test.
It's like by default, half of the questions you have to get wrong.
You will get around 50% of the questions wrong. So you will always leave the exam feeling like you failed every single time. No one walks out. And if you walked out feeling like you passed because you feel like you got more than 50% of the questions wrong, the test is probably giving you such easy questions because you're doing poorly.
Or not. I mean, or not, right? Or you... again, you just whether you feel good or bad doesn't really matter, right? I mean, like,
and that's where it's a mental game of convincing.
Because I also don't want people to get because they're like, oh, I'm getting all these questions right, which means I'm failing. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that either.
You can't hyperanalyze each question in front of you. You just got to you got to answer each question and tackle each question as an individual test. If you can look at it that way, then you'll be okay. What I had to do the second time I took it is I literally had to put my head down when I hit 75 questions. Just put my head down, take a rest, and then set my head up and act like I was taking a new test, start over, and just keep plugging away.
Yeah.
And I say this all the time. I preach this all the time. This is the information that we're going over right now is essentially covering a PowerPoint that I'll take struggling students through in our program. And I walk them through how the NREMT works. And I preach this all the time. At least twice a week, I'm meeting with a student on a Zoom call and taking them through this information. And yet, when I went and took my NCLEX, do you remember what I called you and said?
Yeah, you're like, I failed it.
I think I
completely bombed it.
I feel like I got 50% of them wrong. I completely bombed it. I had no idea what they were asking me. Not only did I not understand the question, I didn't understand what any of the answers meant.
You did
and
say
you were
that.
like, yeah, but like you tell people all the time, that means that you could be doing really good. I'm like, there's no way. I had a 99% chance I didn't pass this test. And I passed it. So, I know I'm a little hypocritical with this, but just understand, like, we can learn from the past mistakes and other people making these mistakes. Like, just trust your training, trust the knowledge base that you have.
I like what you said.
Just approach it.
I like what you said about like taking each question as its own test.
Yeah.
Because too, I know I've done this on exams in the past where like I get a question on, let's say I get a question on, COPD, and then I get another question on COPD. And I'm like, well, I answered the other one this way, but I wasn't sure. So on this one, I'm going to answer it this way.
They're looking for consistency.
To better my chances of getting one of them right. Well, on the NREMT, that
mixes it.
Yeah, that doesn't work, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Every question is different. Even if it's the exact same question, answer it the way you think is the correct. I mean, every question is its own test, like you said. And
don't try to game the test in that way. Like, it's not going to work. The test is designed where it won't allow you to do that. I had the first time I took it, I think I had like probably a dozen or 24 questions about burns. And like people ask me how the NREMT go. And I'm like, know your burn stuff. It's all about burns. You know what I mean? And my second one, I had like one question, right? That doesn't necessarily mean I aced that burn question or I was struggling with burn questions before. It's just the sampling that it decided to give me.
Yeah.
So it'll do this in every individual section, medical, OB-GYN, trauma, cardiology. It'll do each individual section, and that's why you get a printout at the end where it'll say you were near passing in certain areas, you were failing in certain areas, and then you were passing.
It will
in
test
others.
you in each section. It just may give you a couple questions in one and a bunch in the other.
Yeah.
So and this is another thing we run into, asking people what's going to be on what was on your exam is a really bad way to study.
Yeah.
It's why our program does really well, because we literally cover all the high yield stuff that could show up.
Right.
And we don't get into like all the like the low end, like, oh, there's a 10% chance you might see a couple of these things. No, we focus on like the 90% of stuff that's high yield that we know you're going to see, we're definitely going to see. But it's not like you said, like if you told someone like study burns, they could get no burn questions, right? That could be the trauma version of their hypothermia. I mean, like it doesn't.
The most frustrating question that we see online is what's on the NREMT? Like, what should I study? It's like you have to study all of it.
You should study www.guardiantestprep.com's NREMT test prep program.
So then the last thing I want to mention too is that in order to test someone at that level 5 level, like they might decide to ask you 20 level 4 questions and then say, hey, he's good enough in that area. Or they might ask you one level 10 question. And that's why you might see one burn question or not any at all, or because they got you something somewhere else in trauma. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if they ask you one level 10 question, you get that right, they might not ask you any further questions in that category because they're like, and again, a little bit of an extreme example, but they will literally just move you on because they're like, he answered those crazy high level questions. We're not going to ask him questions about that. In the same situation, technically, it is a possibility that if you fail like 2 or 3 level 1 questions, they might just be like, hey, you know what? He's not cut out for this part, so we're going to move on to the next portion, right? So just stop trying to understand why the test is asking you the next question. Just take the test.
Yeah.
Just take the test. Approach each question like it's its own test.
And you don't have to pass every topic either, right? Like maybe like you failed the burn, but they'll give you other, right?
Yeah, well, you have to pass every category, but you don't have to pass every topic.
That's what
that category.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So like trauma, you know what I mean? Like if you failed the burn questions, but then they ask you stuff about, major bleeding or something like that, you can still pass trauma going through that subject.
That's what I mean.
They're not going to take you through every subject by any means. So that's kind of just understanding the test. Hopefully that helps you guys out a little bit. Now let's move on to kind of just simple test taking tips. And just so you guys know, we're not going to tell you like always pick C. Like it's not one of those gamey, cheat the test type of situation. Like this is pretty specific, and this is coming from people who write a lot of test questions and have had training on how to write questions for the NREMT. So some simple stuff. Prepare yourself for the test, right? Like nothing substitutes preparation, right? And we talk a lot about one of the best things I think that you've ever said to me, Chris, is when you were in med school, you bounced around a lot with your study plan. You like try a program online and then you'd be like, oh no, I remember like talking to you every week. It was like, but this time I'm going to highlight, and you were always kind of trying to find the best way to study.
And what happens is a lot of students that they ask their buddies like, oh, how did you study? How are you studying? And again, you have this tendency to, you're like, okay, I'm going to read the textbook and then I'm going to take notes. And then you're like, well, so-and-so is writing note card. And you jump around to different strategies. Hands down, and I always say like perfect is the enemy of good.
This is the quote. It's coming.
What?
This is the quote. It's coming.
I'm not going to. What quote?
You always. I think I have it in this PowerPoint. You say,
"This is something I say all the time."
A good plan executed fully is better than the perfect plan not executed.
Yes, correct. That's not my
Honestly,
quote. I'm sure I found that
some
online.
general said that. That doesn't sound like a Chris thing to say. No. But you said something along those lines when you were talking about how I should study for the paramedic.
But that applies. So what I'm saying is like if you wait to find the perfect study plan, you won't study, you won't get through the material. Right. Just find a study plan that works for you and stick with it and cover everything. That's why we say like even with our program, like just do the whole program. Maybe our voices bother you or like the video doesn't resonate with you or the workbook. Just do it the whole thing, because like doing the whole thing and completing everything, you've seen the material now 2 or 3 times is going to go farther than if you studied perfectly like one section out of 5.
If you do 2% of our content and 2% of somebody else's content, and you 2% of the time you are reading the textbook and taking notes, like you never fully completed studying for anything. You didn't put enough effort into any study area, and you're going to fail now. And
because of the way the NREMT is, what we see people do and this is why we don't subscribe to the idea of only using question banks when you study, because what happens is you continue to get the same questions right and you continue to get the same questions wrong. And on one test, more of the ones are on there, so you pass that practice test. On another test, less of those are on there, so you fail it. And like you're not learning anything.
Educating yourself. You're just testing
question
yourself.
banks should always be used in a format of you take a question. If you get it right, you make sure you understand why you got it right. If you get it wrong, you go and read that section of your course book to figure out why each that's how a question bank should be used.
And it's slow and it's steady and people don't like that. And I understand that, but we're going to kind of walk you through a way to start reading questions in order to help you walk through that process and actually educate yourself through the questions. I'm hoping that by the end of this, you guys understand that like testing yourself is part of your study plan. Like testing doesn't have to be a scary thing. Testing is an education tool.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say that testing is more often used as an education tool than it is used as an evaluation of your prior education.
Sure.
Like the NREMT, it's an evaluation of your prior education. But all the tests you take in your medic program or your EMT program, those are designed to make you learn. It's to teach you things. So through failure or success, right? So when you're preparing for the test, stick with a plan. I'm just going to share my story real quick. When I started the paramedic program, I had decided that how I was going to study for it was I was going to read the textbook. I was going to then go back over the textbook, the chapters that I had to do and highlight the key points. I then would go back over it again and I would note the points that I highlighted. And then I would take those notes and I would lecture myself, my wife or my girlfriend at the time, or you, or I'd find, my sister or something, and I would lecture it to them and try to explain to them, or I just lecture myself in the mirror. Now, was that an efficient way to study for the test? Not at all. It took hours, hours and hours to go over 2 or 3 chapters. But did I do it the entire time? Yeah. Did I ace the program? Yeah. Right. So I knew it worked. It didn't matter that it was efficient. I wasn't going to, because of what you had said from the beginning, I wasn't going to start looking at my neighbor and going, well, how are they studying? Maybe I can make this more efficient, save some time. It was just, I know that this works. I'm going to stick with this plan.
Yeah.
So pick a plan that works for you, stick with that plan, and see it to completion. Okay. Then just trust your plan. Stop having anxiety about your plan not working or anything like that, right? Just trust your plan. I know that's hard to say. It's counterintuitive to say stop being anxious about something, right? Or try to relax is, I think, just a funny phrase. Hey, try to relax. It just doesn't really work.
I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
Let me
so beyond that, some of the obvious stuff, like prepare yourself physically and mentally for this exam, right? So like the day before and the day of, like make sure you're eating, right? Try to eat a balanced diet. Don't be dumb. Sleep before your exam if you can. I always say like, hey, I totally get it. It's like near impossible to sleep. If you're taking your exam in the morning, it's near impossible to sleep that night, right? But the days leading up to that where you're getting adequate sleep, right? Like prepare yourself. Don't try to cram and overstress yourself. Like prepare yourself. Get your body the sleep it needs. And then if you have one restless nights before the exam, that's fine. Use that anxiety and that adrenaline to your advantage. But you're not like chronically sleep deprived now when you go in to take your exam.
Right.
I don't recommend that anyone should study the day before.
Yeah, I usually don't either.
Everyone says, I'm going to cram. Cramming is just really hurts.
I think some light review is fine if there's a couple points you just want to like refresh in your head, but like very light,
Yeah. I feel like go out, spend time with your family, spend time with your friends, distract yourself, but just don't stay out super late. Take care of yourself. That's what you should do the day before exam is just take care of yourself mentally and physically.
I think like light studying, hard cocaine.
Nope.
No?
Don't do that. So yeah. And then, a lot of people push meditation, doing meditation, that's something that can really help your mental health. And we're not saying you got to, pray to a God. We're not saying that you have to do some sort of guru thing or anything like that, or you have to disconnect your spirit from your body. Meditation, we just mean, quietly thinking to yourself and processing thoughts. That alone, if you do that right before you go up to take your exam in your car when you're waiting to take it, it's a huge help in clearing your mind and giving you clarity. So you don't have to have special techniques or anything like that. You don't have to go to a yoga studio to learn how to meditate. We just mean thinking about your thoughts for a little bit, right? Just stay in your head for a little bit, think about your thoughts and try to kind of let those pass and go from there.
Yeah.
And then rest during the exam. Like I told you, when I hit 75, I put my head down for 20 minutes. I'd never heard, I shouldn't say this because there's someone out there that's going to be like, you jerk. But I have never heard of a student struggling with the time frame on the exam. They give you a lot of time to take these questions. You would have to be really struggling with the concepts and getting really hung up on individual questions to run out of time.
I think that they give you adequate time. I think there are probably some students who struggle with time because they're either overanalyzing every question because they're anxious, or they don't understand the topics, and that's why it's taking them a long time. So
I had a student one time tell me though that they had like a tutor that was telling them, a pretty popular tutor that we see on these forums and stuff, was telling them like, you need to be able to answer the question in 10 seconds or less and then move on because you're running out of time. Like that is not the case, guys. You have minutes for every question. If you split it up between the max amount of questions you can get, you have minutes for every question. And you should really be using every second of that minute when we teach you this technique on how to read questions. It might take some time. The way we'll teach you how to read questions does take a longer period of time than just what you're used to answering. But I promise you, when you get good at it, you're not going to run out of time in this exam. So don't be afraid to rest during. You got the time. You can see your timer, how much time you have left in. So just kind of do the math of how many questions max you can get. Hey, I got plenty of time. I'm at 75 and I got 2.5 hours left and I'm only an hour in. Okay, well, I can put my head down for like an hour if I want to now. Right.
The other thing too is that I'll just note that the NREMT has been, because of COVID and stuff, letting people take the exam at home. Mm-hmm. That home exam that you take, I mean, there's a proctor on a camera and stuff like that. It is 120 questions, period.
Yeah.
Everyone gets 100
right now. As of right now, podcast, things get changed all the time.
But as of right now, so like some people will be like, well, I took it at home and I got 120 questions. Yeah, that's standard for the home test as of right now, like you said.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So some other things that I want to talk about, just some preparation for the test, just techniques you can use. One's called memory dumping. So we already talked about having like a good plan executed fully is better than a perfect plan. Memory dumping is a technique that you can use when you have a specific topic that you maybe struggle with. This works good for like the rule of nines.
I was just gonna say the rule of nines, the GCS,
any formula, the GCS, things that are it's hard for you to remember. Right before you go up to take the test, review that information, kind of hold that in your head, and then when you sit down, they give you a piece of paper and a marker that you can write notes on. Quickly write down, draw the picture of the guy, write the Parkland-Burn formula out, do the rule of nines, write the formulas that you struggle with, and then set that paper aside and just allow yourself a few seconds to just forget that now, because now you have a reference manual. You don't need to have that fresh in your mind, because what ends up happening is, I told you in the first test, I got a bunch of burn questions, right? So let's say I didn't go in and memory dump that Parkland-Burn formula. Now what's happening is I'm not reading the airway question in front of me because I'm constantly anticipating this burn question to come up.
Sure.
And it's trying to remember. It's in the front of my head.
You're trying to remember the rule of nines. Don't forget the rule of nines because you might get a burn question, but the question in front of you is not that. And now we're not as present in the current question.
We're not taking each question as a test like I talked about, right? Mm-hmm. So like take each question like a test. In order to do that, you got to not be anticipating the test that's coming up.
What are your recommendations for brain dump? Because you can't brain dump everything, right? So I always think GCS is huge.
Yeah. Anything you struggle with. The thing is if the Parkland-Burn formula and the rule of nines is, you can recall that very easily, and it's gonna be different for everybody. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's a particular drug interaction, or something very specific.
Mine would be
really specific things.
GCS, because I always get just confused on GCS. I'll make silly mistakes, right? Yeah. I'll make silly mistakes on it and get questions wrong. Anatomy, physiology, probably like OBGYN, pediatrics.
You're just gonna name every topic.
If I could brain dump those,
how would you put all of A and P on a piece of paper? No, but like literally how I'm trying to think of like sodium potassium pump or something like that. That's something that confuse you. Like draw it on the piece of paper and then just set it aside, and then you'll come to that later, right? So just little things like that.
I would say when you're, and this is another way where practice tests come into play. If there are certain questions that like but you keep getting wrong for like little silly reasons, like that might be something you're like, okay, you know what? Like let me think of. And again, like for me, it's always GCS. Like I'll miss like 1 point on one because I'm trying to do it from memory. And what an easy question to get right if you just have it written in front of you, right? So you can kind of see in your practice testing what are some themes of like, and you know what I mean, right? Because like I feel everybody has that. They're like, oh my gosh, like, I know that, but I keep getting it wrong because I keep making these little mistakes.
And in your practice tests, do memory dumps. So eventually, what'll happen is you'll start to realize that there's a series of things that if you write on a piece of paper, you do better with when you're taking the test. So use that resource. And then eventually you have basically a study guide that you've drawn for yourself out that you have memorized, that you write before every test, and then it helps you through the test.
I've actually never thought about practicing taking that like 1 page of note before practice tests. I like that a lot. Because
people take study materials into practice tests all the time. Like if I'm sitting at my home and I take study materials and you're like, well, but I'm cheating because the book's right here. Well, not really. They allow you to quote unquote bring your own book in as long as you can do it from recollection right away, right? So you can come up with a cheat sheet for yourself and then memorize that cheat sheet and then dump that before the test and then use that cheat sheet throughout the test. You know, it's a huge advantage that you don't get in a lot of standardized testing. And this is I think it's just it's a big asset to you for you to use.
Yeah.
So that's one technique. We talked a little bit about building a plan that you trust, even if it's not necessarily the most efficient thing. Once you do that, make sure you trust your plan and just carry it out. And then the last thing that I would say is, and this is hard for people to hear when we're talking about people who have just failed it and then they join the program, they're like, I need some advice. But they say, or I always say, remember that you get many tries. Consider every attempt as test preparation for the time that you're going to pass it. Okay, so we do need to kind of change our thinking of what a test is. A test, you can fail a test or you can pass a test and you can have learned something and grown from that. So I think just get out of your head. You get a lot of tries on these tests. Get out of your head the fact that you're not going to make it. Like, you will make it. It might be on try number 6. You know, it just might. So, but you're going to make it.
Unless when you go to www.guardiantestprep.com.
Then you'll get it on 1. No, and ideally,
no, I get what you're saying.
And our stats look great. And ideally, you will get it on the first time you go through the program or something like that. But keep in mind, you get a lot of tries on this test. It's normal and healthy and okay. And it's not a reflection on what kind of provider you're going to be if you fail one of them. It's just not. Yeah. So when you go into test 1, don't feel like it's your last chance and it's test 6. You know, we just tend to put so much pressure on ourselves, especially because a lot of you guys are in a period of your life where you're doing this for a career that needs to make you money, or so that you can step into a career that needs to make you money to put bread on the table. You know what I mean? So
how many guys have wanted to stop stripping and haven't been able to because they haven't passed this test?
Guys? Yeah, but seriously, I think that maybe take some of the pressure off yourself a little bit and just realize, like, hey, by try number 6, yeah, I'm going to be a paramedic. Or by try number 6, I'm going to be an EMT. Like, I know I'm going to get there.
We say all the time, we know lots of very good EMTs and medics who didn't do well in this exam at all. And we know some EMTs and medics who are not really that great at their job and pass their first try. I mean, it really, regardless of how many times you take it, I mean, it is not a reflection of you as a provider in the field. I mean, it's a different type of assessment. Like, you have to get through it, but you know.
I think what we're getting at here is, like, just be careful of your self-talk, right? If you walk out and you find out that you were near passing in 5 areas, but you didn't make all 5, you're not a terrible medic. You're not never going to get a job. Right. You're not never going to, now you're not going to be able to feed your family. This spiral down thinking is very common in students that have a lot of pressure on them. So you're going to feel that, but you need to be able to self-talk and say, no, you know what? I'm excited for the next opportunity. You know, I'll get it on the next one. And I'm going to continue to progress and use this as a stepping stone on my path to success, and I will succeed. So now we can kind of shift to what I think is the meat and potatoes of stuff, is understanding question building. All right. Really, if you want to know your enemy with this test, you have to understand how your enemy thinks. And your enemy in this case is the test giver. All right. Now, Chris and I are very much test takers and test givers. So we have learned how to write test questions. And because of that, it's made us better at taking tests. Mm-hmm. So if, as a student who doesn't have experience in these things, that's totally okay. We can kind of walk you through a little bit how a question is most often built out. It helps you get in the test giver's head, and then it allows you to do better on the test itself. Okay. So to give you an example about this, so typically in the average question, if it's multiple choice, and I know now the NREMT does some multiple selection choices and stuff like that, but we're just going to talk about multiple choice as an example for today. So in multiple choice, you obviously have the right answer, right? Let's say there's 4 questions. You got the right answer. What makes something a good question is what comes next, and it's called the distractor. And essentially it's the answer that is close to correct or differentiated by some nuances in the question from being correct.
It's really the part of the question that, like, this is where they're testing your knowledge. Right. Can you distinguish between so you may just not know it at all, which is why there's other options, but like either you know it and you know why you know it, or you have an idea of it, but you don't know it fully. And literally that's the difference between the correct answer and the distractor answer.
Yeah. So the distractor is basically the next best option, or the one that would would be right if it wasn't for the other one. And a lot of people say on these tests, like, you have to choose the most best answer. Yes and no. There is a clear correct answer on every single one of these. There is a clear correct answer. There are sometimes a distractor that is very close, but I'm telling you, the question gives you what you need to know to differentiate those two. That is the point of the question, is what makes it strong. If I tell you, if my question is, the sky is A, blue, B, apple, C, pear, D, mud, the answer is A, blue, but I didn't give you other colors as your distractors, so it's not a good question at all, right? It doesn't have anything to do with anyone could answer that question.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So if I say the sky is A, blue, B, red, well, at least now it's another color. So since A and B are both colors and they have similarities, now I have a stronger question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, very elementary example, but you have to have, in order for a question to be a good question, you have to have good answers and alternative answers in order to make it really test your knowledge.
Right.
So that's how we use it. So the other things that you'll see are two things that I've kind of named. One is the garbage answer. Okay. It's the one that's definitely, it's the apple one, right? It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just there.
It's the one where
we got lazy and we needed to fill the question.
Well, it's also the one that, like, if you answered it that way, like, you don't know the concept, and it's fine, but like that, yeah,
it's designed. Those are designed to fill slots in multiple choice, and they're throwaways. Okay. There's not a whole lot of those on NREMT level tests, but you'll see them sometimes. And then the other is what I like to call, I use this a lot, it's called the sounds fancy answer. If you ever go on our Facebook group, what is the name of it? I always mix up the name of it. It's
NREMT daily practice questions.
NREMT daily practice questions. And you look at some of these questions that we have written. We come out with one a day. You can look, you can answer it, you can get some practice. But if you look at these, I use this sound fancy answer a lot as an attempt to distract you. So what you do is you just take something that sounds scientific or sounds like it has something to do with it. You take the right adjective, or you take the right, what am I thinking of? Like the prefix or suffix of something that has to do with it, and you throw it in there, and it's designed to throw off educated guesses.
Or you put in something that is like very complex, because you're playing on the fact, like, again, it's a little bit of an evil thing, but you're playing on the fact that, like, do you really know the answer, or is something that sounds like something you don't know going to trick you into picking it?
Right.
Because if it, like, again, it's a fancy answer. It may be like a correct statement, but it has nothing to do, but it's purposely made fancy, or like a medication that you're not used to, because the test giver wants you to think to yourself, oh, well, I don't even really understand that. So maybe that's the right answer, because how could I possibly know the answer? It's like, no, like, you know the answer. That's what we want you to be able to do.
It's designed to, it's relatable to the question, if that makes sense.
Right.
But it's not relevant to the question.
Right.
And that's how you get people, is you put in words, like if you're talking about the muscle, you put something that says sacromere in it, because your knowledge knows that, sacromere has something to do with the muscle.
Yeah.
So it must be that one. But I was asking, about like contractility, right? It just doesn't have anything to do with it.
That plays to how to read the question. So if you don't mind me jumping in this part too, because like I said, like that part of it is, what is the question asking? So we always say that you should start with the end of the question before you read the full question. Because what happens is you'll get like a paragraph long question, or a question with a bunch, and really the last couple words is what the question actually is.
Yeah.
So to give you an example of that, like, I could have a whole, like, 50-year-old male presents with crushing chest pain and shortness of breath. And so immediately my mind starts thinking, is this PE?
Well, right. Let me stop you right there. If I haven't memory dumped and I have like an anxiety about it, I'm instantly now, my mind is going through an infinite number of possibilities, concentrated on my weaknesses of what this answer could possibly be.
Well,
right?
even with
presented a scenario that has infinite endings, and in my mind, like you said, okay, I already know there's a 50-year-old male. Is this going to be about atypical signs?
And I would say even without a brain dump, right? Like, if maybe you brain dumped a couple things that are like, but like it's so if you start at the beginning of the question and you read a 50-year-old man with chest pain, immediately your mind starts thinking, like it should clinically, okay, is this, is this cardiac ischemia? Is this PE? And then it's like, here's his vital signs. And now you're reading his vital signs. You're like, okay, is that blood pressure high? Is it low? Is the heart rate high? Okay. And then like, and he has a history of this. Okay. If he's got a history of PE,
how does that
then maybe
factor in?
he's on blood thinners, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, what is the first line treatment for this patient? And like the first answer is like, oxygen. And like, you didn't even have to read all, but you went through this whole mental gymnastics thing to get to the, like, so we always say, read that part first.
Read the end of the question, then read what each answer is. It's going to be a lot easier for your mind to take 4 answers and slot them into a scenario as you go and see which one fits than it is to read a scenario that has infinite possibilities and then try to cram that into 4 answers. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Because back to my example, let's say the answers are oxygen, nitro, aspirin, and heparin, right? So, and the question is, what is the first thing? So what are the first thing to do? We're talking about treatments now. So now I'm not thinking about this guy's past medical, because like I'm thinking about what is the treatment. So I'm starting to think like, what does he have? But I know it's going to be one of these. And what is the first thing I'm going to do? Yeah. So if I go through like, okay, would I give him nitro at this point? Well, no, probably not. Like you're thinking in terms of the actual question now as you go through. Yeah,
as you hear vital signs that are relative to oxygenation, you're thinking, okay, does oxygen slot in here? Okay, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Okay, let me move down. You're slotting 4 options in as opposed to having an infinite number of options. Now, it does go slower. Okay, reading a question like this just goes slower. You'll get faster at it, but because you're kind of breaking your brain and you're doing things differently, it's going to make you slow things down a little bit. So some other things that we want you to do while you're doing this is pace yourself. You're going to start with the end, read all the answers, then read the entire question. Then ask yourself, what is this question trying to teach me? And then ask yourself, where's the distractor? And then really, if you're getting more talented at this, have a mental discussion with yourself about why this was a good question or wasn't a good question. Really what we want to do is turn you into enough of a nerd where you're reading these questions and you're going, oh, this was good because what it's trying to teach me is that oxygen is obviously going to be the front line, but the distractor was aspirin because I'm going to give aspirin later. But you know what I mean? And you start playing that in your head and you understand, you have a comprehensive knowledge of the topic, which means the question's doing its job, which means it's a good question, which means you gave it a good answer. And then you can move on to the next test.
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what we want you to be able to do. Beyond that, and we'll show you an example of this. We'll take you through one. Beyond that, this is where we get a little bit gimmicky. There is educated guessing. All right. Sometimes you will read a question and you'll be like I told you guys earlier when I was taking my NCLEX, I told Chris, like, I didn't know what the question was asking. I didn't know what any answers meant.
Right.
This is where you can now apply educated guessing. And a lot of like test prep things will try to give you these things right away. These are only to be used as the last resort. They're not a rule. They can help you when you have no other,
and don't spend a lot of time educated guessing, right? Like spend time reading the questions that way. If you get to something where you really don't know what it's asking, be like, okay, educated guess, bam, move on. You know what I mean?
So one of them is grammatical matching. So using basic grammar rules, sometimes it can lend to what the correct answer is going to be. If I asked you what is the best fruit is an blank, and I had apple, pear, grape, and banana,
it would be
apple.
It would have
to be apple because I said an, right? After an, you have to have an ah noise, right? So that's just grammar. You have to do that. So they just gave away the answer. And sometimes we as test givers, we're human too. We make those mistakes and we give away the answer with grammatical matching. So that's something to look for. Another thing to look for is fallacies. So if one answer, if it is true, another answer has to be true as well. Well, guess what? Neither of them are true.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to look at kind of logical fallacies within questions too. So you have to kind of say if then and ask those kind of questions. The other is, and this is funny because let's say we're going to write a question, Chris. Like let's you and I write a question so that these guys can understand it. So let's say first we got to pick what we want to ask people. Like, what do we want to teach people? So pick a topic.
So let's say
I got an example. If you want to just pick that one.
Okay. So
we want to talk about.
I want to know if the EMTs and paramedics out there know that a flat line in the EKG is asystole, and we don't shock that. We start CPR. Okay. Right. That's all I want. I want that to be what I'm teaching.
So we start the topic. Now you notice where Chris got already is he has the answer in his mind really before he's formulated the question.
Right.
He wants the answer to be either don't shock the patient or start chest compressions instead. Right. So let's say we pick start chest compressions. So there's our answer.
Right.
We have our answer. Now we build the question. So during a pause in CPR, Chris and Jason see a flat line. What should they do now? The answer is
the correct answer is start compressions. what I'm trying to teach is not to shock. So my distractor is obviously going to be shock the patient.
So now we're really excited. We've built a question now, right? We've got a distractor, we've got an answer, but we also have 2 multiple choice things that we have to fill.
Right.
So now we just start making crap up. All right. So what are some things you do in CPR? You give epinephrine.
Yep.
Okay. So let's throw that in there. And then you give amiodarone on some rhythms.
Sure.
So let's put that in there. Right. So how we write these questions helps you understand what's going on. We get weaker and weaker as we put in more distractors.
Yeah.
So you can kind of point that out sometimes. And a lot of times, statistically speaking, if you're unsure, pick the longest answer. Because when Chris and I and the caffeine's flowing and we're feeling good and we're writing the question and we want to get real specific about what we're trying to teach, the answer ends up being this really long answer. And then as we get to the distractors, we're just kind of like AMI, epi, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not, you're not being as specific enough.
Yeah.
So if you have to, and you're really not sure by any other means, pick the longest answer. And there's a decent chance you'll get it right. Remember that there are pilot questions in the NRMT. We briefly touched on that. So just remember that you might be answering a question that purposely is broken. It's not written in the correct way. And they would just want to see how an EMT or paramedic in training would respond to that. So just understand that. And then go with your gut and don't change your answer unless you found something in the question that definitely rules it out. All right. There is a weird phenomenon where we found that if you change your answer after you pick your first one,
without new data,
if you just change your answer, you'll get it wrong.
Yeah.
I don't really get why.
There's actually other studies that say that if you do change your answer,
the door thing, what is that principle, that mathematical principle where you got 3 doors and it's like I'll think of it. It's a game. It was an old game show. You'd have 3 doors. He'd open one. The prize isn't in there. So now you should always switch your door. It's like a rule.
Oh, really?
You always switch your door is statistically better. But that's with three potential scenarios. It's a whole different thing.
There's
but there is a mathematical principle that basically says don't change your answer because you're going to get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So just don't change your answer.
Well, especially when you are you do have knowledge here. Whether you feel like during the test you understand or not, you do. So your gut reaction is usually probably the correct answer because you know something about the terms they're talking about or something about the question or something about the concept. So again, like Jason said, unless you have all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't realize that the blood pressure was low. That must mean, okay, yeah, change your answer. Yeah. But if you're just like, I don't know,
it doesn't feel good,
I'll just switch it to this other one.
Or you start doing what Chris talked about earlier. Well, last time I said this one. So if I spread out the stats.
Right. I actually there's actually a test I took in like elementary school where it was like, you guys have probably, other people have probably taken this, but it's like basically trying to like help predict what you're going to be when you grow up or like where your strengths are. But it was like a bunch of like questions like, would you rather like, work with your hands, like build a chair, write a paper, like write a book,
do a math equation,
or something like that. And I'd be like, I want to build a chair. And then the next question would be like, would you rather build a chair? I'm like, well, I already built a chair. So I'm going to this time write a book.
I would have a very balanced life.
Right. Exactly. I took the test like that. So it was like I think like the top thing was like tractor driver was like my like top like job potential after I took, because again, like you got to understand what the test is asking. So again, this test is going to ask you multiple questions about the same concept. Don't just pick random answers to try to like spread out your chances of getting it right because it doesn't even work that way.
No, it's not going to play to your advantage. So, all right. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over this example question and break it down. Okay. So we do have during a pause in CPR, Chris and Jason see a flat line in the EKG. They should now shock the patient, perform chest compressions, administer epinephrine, or administer amiodarone. We wouldn't read the question this way.
No,
we would read the last part. They should now.
So what the question is, what is the next thing that I'm going to do?
Yep. And then so we have shock the patient, perform chest compressions, administer epi, or administer amiodarone.
Okay.
Now with that prior knowledge, I'm going into the full question knowing that it's going to be one of these 4 options.
Right.
That's an advantage. We have more data than we normally have going into a question. So, and we probably know based on what it all is, what this is about. It's going to be about CPR. So during a pause in CPR, Chris and Jason see a flat line in the EKG. They should now. Which one should they do? Now, decent distractors in this one, to be honest with you, because we have shock the patient is our throwaway. We know that you shouldn't shock the patient with a flat line. Perform chest compressions. Yeah, we're definitely going to do that. And we're definitely going to administer epinephrine too. But which one do we do next?
Right now, we're going to
start chest compressions and then we'll get epi going after that, right? So is administer epinephrine right? Yeah, if perform chest compressions wasn't there.
Right.
But perform chest compressions is 100% the right answer. And this is where people say, oh, you're choosing the best answer the best right answer out of all of them. It's not really true. Administer epinephrine is not the right answer. It's not what you should do next.
Right.
You should perform chest
Another thing that I'll see people do too, because sometimes they'll be like, well, this is a bad question or they're wrong, is it'll say this question: during a pause in CPR, Chris and Jason see flatline in the EKG. They should now shock the patient, administer amiodarone, administer epinephrine, or get further history. And they're like, well, you should start chest compressions. Okay, sure. But that wasn't an
That's
option.
not one of the
So
options.
what is the option?
Yeah.
Then the answer is
best is
administer epinephrine.
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and give the epinephrine.
Yeah, so like people be like, well, that's a bad question. Like they're wrong. I say, well, no, like the question is asking you something. What they want you to know in that, what they're testing you is what medication do you give next, right? So again, what are they testing me in this question? In the first question, they're asking, do I know that a flat line is asystole and that chest compressions are the most important thing? In my second version of that question, what they're trying to test you is, do you know the next medication that's supposed to be given in an algorithm?
Right. So, and you would up the level of that question because you have to have further comprehension of the situation. If I take data away from you and say, now figure it out. Now what would you do?
Right.
Now what's best? You have to have an understanding of the topic.
Right.
So, yeah.
Cool.
That's how you take the
All
test. I don't really know how to end this, but like that's
so,
what we got
but
for
hopefully
you.
that helps. So like I said, these are test taking tips. Really for any exam. Specifically, we're focusing obviously on the NREMT. If you guys need help with it, Jason does do this like every week with students. If you're one of our students in our NREMT test prep program, reach out if you need help. If you want to go over this in further detail, we would love to meet with you. If you are looking to take that NREMT, know someone who is, or have taken it before and you're feeling discouraged, check us out, guardiantestprep.com. We really, like I said, we've got like a 94% pass rate after taking our program on the NREMT. We've got question banks and videos and workbooks and everything you need to succeed. And we really do want to see you do that. And again, a lot of times this is a key part of that is, do you know how to take the test?
Yeah.
So
one of the things that
helps.
I do a lot is that students will want to sit down with me and just, let's say they've got a question bank, like maybe they have our registry ready question bank and they just want to pick 10 questions. And they want to read the questions like we just talked about. They want to go through the questions in that way. Practice doing the questions in that way with me just kind of sitting there and coaching them. Yeah. And I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah. And like honestly teach this to a friend and then do it back and forth together. Like, you know what I mean? Like learn. It's super beneficial. Again, it can be frustrating because it's slow, but that's how you're actually going to learn. And that's how you're going to actually pass. Yeah. So awesome. Well, we appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back again next week. We hope you have a good one. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot us a message.
Stay sweet.
Hey guys, thanks so much for taking a listen. If you are studying for the National Registry exam, we're here to help. We have a National Registry prep program to help you pass that exam. Check us out at guardiantestprep.com. If you'd like continuing education credits for listening to our podcast or watching this on YouTube, follow us at guardiancme.com. 100% free CAPC credits. No matter what state or country you're in, we're here to help. So again, we thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a wonderful week.